The Art of Leadership Network.
Hey leaders, welcome to the LeadCulture Podcast. We are a part of the Art of Leadership Network. I'm your host, Jenni Catron, CEO of the Foresight Group, and we're a company dedicated to helping leaders develop thriving teams. Each week, I'll be your guide as we explore practical strategies to equip you with the tools you need to lead with clarity, confidence, and build unstoppable momentum in your organization. My mission is to be your trusted coach, empowering you to master the art of self-leadership so you'll learn to lead yourself well so you can lead others better. Each week, we take a deep dive on a leadership or a culture topic. You'll hear stories from amazing guests and leaders like you who are committed to leading well. So let's dive in and keep learning on this leadership journey together. Well, friends, today I am joined by one of our Foresight coaches, Dorian Botsis. Dorian is a passionate, devoted follower of Christ and loves helping people, especially in the area of strategy and leadership development. He serves as the executive pastor of Faith Community Church, and Dorian and I connected years ago. I probably have to go back in the archives. And I had the privilege of coaching him, and then he joined us on our team a couple years ago. He's also an engaging speaker and developer of others. He has had varied experience in different industries, has a PhD in theology with a focus on theological ethics and a concentration in leadership development. And he recently did his coaching certification. He's also a LeadCulture certified coach. And so he is just one of those people who loves to learn and loves to help support other leaders. So Dorian, thanks for joining me.
Well, that was a mouthful. It's a pleasure to be here. And the accent is from the deep south, further in Texas, in South Africa. So I think it was 8 years ago, Jenni, we met at a conference and you started
That's
coaching.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, it's crazy because it was at the early days of Foresight that you were one of the early clients that I got to work with in a coaching capacity. And again, your passion for leading yourself well, your passion for leading your team well. It's like we just connected on so many of those things, and we've had the privilege to stay connected through the years. And now we're benefiting from your leadership as part of the Foresight team. So fun to have you here. Dorian, it'd be fun for you. I mean, I know I gave just kind of the quick bio overview, but tell us a little bit more about your role, the church you're a part of, just kind of the scope of your world. Give everybody a picture of your world.
Sure. I'm the executive pastor at Faith Community Church in Hopkinton, Mass. If you've ever watched the Boston Marathon, you will have seen our church. We're 1 mile from the start, and the runners all run past our church. It's a great church that has a long history. 300 years is a long time. It's had its ups, its downs. It was revitalized by Pastor Dick Germain, and now it's led by Mike Lawrence, who is our lead pastor. And my job at the church is to help them with strategy, to guide our staff, keep them connected, and make sure our mission finds reality in ministry plans and ministry objectives. And so that's primarily what my role is. We're a multi-site church, 2 campuses, with a congregation of about 500 in attendance, online and in person. But we really don't focus on attendance. We focus on engagement at our church.
Sure.
So we really want to focus on how many people are engaged. And so that's really where our focus is. We have over 700 people who are connected in some way to our church and to our campuses. So that's my job. Keep them connected.
Keep them connected. Yes. Which is not necessarily always easy, is it?
No.
Keeping people connected, especially in a world that we have so many distractions and things coming at us. So I love that. Yeah. And I loved that piece of history about your church being right there by the start of the Boston Marathon. I was like, I'll never forget that. I got to be out there last year with you guys. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But also the 300 years of history, and especially when we're talking about culture, when it's so rare, especially here in the States, to have organizations with that kind of history. I mean, I've served at one church that is now 150 years old. And I thought that was, a lot of history. And I'd come from a church plant, and then I went to a church that at the time was 140 years old. And I thought, whew, this is a lot of history, but you've got that doubled. And there's so much richness in that. And some of that might come out as we talk about culture. But you invited me to come work with your team. And I was on site last year. You actually planned this because you're the strategist that you are. I think I told you when you booked me to come and do a workshop with you guys, I think you were it was the furthest out somebody had ever booked me for a workshop.
Yes.
Like, you were so planned in advance.
It was 9 months out. We booked you 9 months in advance.
Yeah. I was like, who is this that plans this far out? I did know you, but I'm like, I love this. So that speaks to the strategic part of you that is so intentional. But you did. You invited me to work with your team last year on culture. And I'd love for you to share what you were noticing and why you prioritized it. So clearly you planned it 9 months ahead. You weren't doing it as a reaction to something in the immediate. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about backstory of saying, hey, we're gonna emphasize some culture work.
Yeah, we had gone through a change in mission statements. The lead pastor, our existing lead pastor, he's been here for over 20 years as the lead pastor, 35 years on staff. But we'd gone through a mission change. We had changed our mission statement, refocused our work. We'd even chosen some values as a staff. But something didn't feel right. So we weren't in crisis. This wasn't an implosion or a disaster on staff or anything like that. We were doing well. Church was growing. We were coming out of COVID. Things were firing on almost all cylinders. And that's where the problem was. I don't know if you've ever driven a car that misfires. It's going, but it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Yeah, when I looked at our values and how we made decisions, I kind of went back to the Jim Collins concept of you don't choose your values, you discover them. And I was like, I don't think we've discovered them yet. But I needed some help with that work. Then finding a way to sync all of that together was critical. So as we engaged our staff, wanted to work forward, it just felt like something was off. So bringing you in to work on our culture, and there's this great phrase you use, Jenni, often, and I'm going to butcher it as I share it, but this idea of you have culture, you either are intentionally working on it or it's being formed without intention. So we want it to be intentional. I wanted to get behind an intentional path of forming the culture we want it to be. Our goal now is we want to be a church where people love to work and our staff are raving fans and others are seeking to work with us. So we've got to do some work to get there. And that was part of the reason behind asking you to come and be on board with us.
Yeah. Dorian, I think that was one of the things I appreciated so much and still love, as I've tracked with you over the past year, as you guys have continued to do this work, is you weren't in crisis. And that's such a fantastic place to be. What I loved is you noticed what I will often refer to as an inflection point, an inflection point in the organization. So you had just redefined your mission statement. So in my definition of culture, I say that culture is clarity of who we are and how we work together to achieve our mission. And you had just done some tweaking to that mission, right? Like as an organization, you'd said, hey, we're clarifying this mission. And to me, that's a key inflection point of, hey, this is an appropriate time now to say, are we clear on who we are and how we work together to achieve that mission? And the analogy of a car that's misfiring, it's like, we're moving, things are happening. We haven't stalled out on the side of the road, but something's not quite right. Like we need a tune-up, we need some adjustments. And I'm not a mechanic, so I'm going to start butchering it for those who understand it all.
Yeah, that's okay.
But the point being, it was like, yep, something like this could be better. We could do this even better if we got a little more intentional. And I love that was how you looked at it as a leader. Because again, this so many times when people come and engage with Foresight, they'll engage when they've really hit a crisis moment in their culture. And we know that the heavy lift that is when then you're trying to heal a culture. So I love that you guys were so proactive. So we did the 2-day workshop with you guys. I walked you through the LeadCulture framework. I'd love to hear from you. What part of the process was the most helpful or the most eye-opening? Like, where were the ahas for you guys? Because again, you had some understanding and knowledge of the framework, but having somebody facilitate it for you, what was most helpful to your team in that moment?
Well, I mean, three things jump to mind. So one was just reframing our values. That was number one, getting our values in place. But every organization has values. What the LeadCulture workshop did that was different is this wonderful thing you call sticky statements. I'd never heard that before. It's like, yeah, we get our values, we memorize our values. At some point you get bored of memorizing the words over and over again. But sticky statements was such a unique way to think about this, to frame our values in terms of fun little sayings that fit with us. So that was number one. Number two, wow, the values grid in the LeadCulture framework is spectacular. Just this grid of saying, here's what our values are, but how do they play out? What are the scripture verses that support this? What are the behaviors you want to put in place? Those behaviors, wow, that was so helpful to help us live out and not only live out the values, but assess them. Where are we on track? Where are we going off? And then for me as the executive pastor, the journey grid that created for how to embed the values into every aspect of, from onboarding a staff member to our meetings to exit interviews. We were doing a pretty good job with onboarding. We were doing well with exiting, helping staff exit. But our meetings, I thought we had good meetings before the culture workshop. As we went through it, I was like, oh, wow, we have terrible meetings. We're all over the place. Like we're forcing everything into a meeting all at once and putting purpose of our values behind our meetings was very helpful in that process. Those were the three things that just jumped to mind for me. Like that was that was well worth the investment, well worth the time. I mean, to take all our staff and make them stop work for 2 days to work on our culture.
It's a big deal.
Was a big deal. All of our staff walked out of it feeling like it was worth the time.
Yeah, that's because it's a hard ask now, right? I mean, especially I think this is true, and I'm going to have you come back to this a little later in the conversation, but most of us have some kind of flexible work dynamic with our teams these days. And so then 2 full days in the office devoted to something beyond their day-to-day responsibilities is a huge ask. And I love that, like you said, they walked away going, yep, we needed to do this. These were the right conversations. I'm going to have you unpack values a little bit more because you guys did some really, really good work around values. But I want to highlight the employee journey grid that you referenced because so many times, we think about culture and we think we might think values and we might think, okay, let's get those written and done. And then let's do a staff rah-rah day or, have an all staff lunch or things like that we sometimes think are culture. And those things all contribute to culture. But what I've found that's really unlocks healthy, ongoing support of our culture is figuring out those rhythms of everyday life and how is what we're doing in the day-to-day actually reinforcing the best of who we are, right? And so to your point, I think sometimes we don't think, what do meetings have to do with culture? Well, meetings have everything to do with culture because it's how we work together, right? Yep. Meetings are one of the mechanisms for how we work together. So if we're not intentional about making sure our values are guiding that time, that we're being really strategic with that time, we're providing the clarity, the communication, the things that erode culture, the things that often stand out when we're doing culture work with teams is there's communication issues, there's trust issues. And so many times those things can be shored up in the regular rhythms of our work if we're more intentional. And I find that time and time again to be kind of the surprises for people when they start to engage the LeadCulture framework. They're like, oh, you're not just talking about staff fun days and perks. You're talking about the rhythms of how we work together. The more intentional we are about that, the more we're shaping culture. And so I love that some of those things stood out to you.
And that was critical for us, Jenni, to look at our actual work rather than just perks and rewards.
Right.
And bring some meaning to those. And we're still fleshing that out. We're still working on it. So that's good, yeah.
Yeah, it's part of it. I want you to dive into the work that you did on values, because you guys, like you said, you already had, and I think this is key because most of us do have a set of values. So you had some values, but we did the workshop. We talked about that values grid of like, okay, let's look at those values. Let's talk about the belief. Why does that value matter? And for you guys as a church, the scripture references were kind of those anchoring beliefs.
Right.
The behaviors, what does it look like? Because everybody gives their own interpretation of values.
Right.
And then the sticky statements, how do we say it? How do we talk about it? What are the stories that reinforce it? So you guys spent a good bit of time on the heels of that 2-day, because in a 2-day, we're going to get a draft. We're not going to get it finalized. And so you had to do quite a bit of work on the back end of that. But tell us about that process, some of the unique ways that you guys incorporated your values into the rhythms of work. I'd love for you to just kind of share a little more about that. Maybe even share an example or two of your values as you fleshed them out.
Yeah, sure. Prior to you, we had 6 values. I always felt there were too many. And then in the workshop, as we spent time with them, we really distilled down to discover what we really believed in. And I'm not talking about Bible beliefs or theology, but how we work together. What do we hold to? And then we had a creative member on staff who knows American Sign Language and took the sticky statements and turned them into sign language. And those have been far more memorable for us.
One of my absolute favorite stories of values is, that you guys turned them into sign language.
So one of our values is focus. And she came to me after the first day and said, this in sign language is focus. And I was like, oh, that's so great. Can you go look at the other 4 and come up with them? And so she came back with, this is pray first, which is our value of Christ-centered living. The idea of an open door is our relationship value. Keep your door open. Mm-hmm. The innovation one is dream on. So we encourage our staff to dream on. Mm-hmm. I'm terrible. I'm going to forget one of them. We had collaborate as a statement that we do work together. So we had all these sign languages attached to the sticky statements, and they became little humorous stories for us. In our staff, for some reason, whenever we do the collaborate one, people keep moving their hips with it as well. So no idea why. The Dream On has become a great way for us to dive into innovation. So we created these little sayings these actions next to the sticky statements.
Yeah.
The behaviors were critical for us to unpack. How are we doing our work together? What does that look like? So initially, I was the culture champion, kind of driving that. But out of working with you, we added a few staff members to it. So now we have 3 people who are culture champions. And we get together probably monthly to assess how are our values, how are we living them out. And I actually put the values into my direct report meetings. So,
I love that.
I ask 5 questions in our meetings. And it starts with, how can I pray for you? Christ-centered living. What can we celebrate? That's our relationship value. What are you working on? That's focus. What help do you need is our collaboration value. And then what other updates do you have? And that's an opportunity for innovation. Do you have an idea or a thought or other things to add? So those really drove us. And so values became not just words on a wall or scriptures that we had to memorize. They really began to be about who we are and how we work together.
Yeah, gosh, you guys have done such a good job of really incorporating them and then making them actionable. Because you've even told me stories about how you guys will be in a meeting and somebody will use one of the sign language,
right.
The signs to, kind of say, hey, are we innovating here? Are we dreaming on? Or, hey, remember, we need to collaborate. Who needs to be involved in this discussion? And so I've heard you tell stories of sometimes you don't even have to use the words. You just use the sign language and everybody's, yep, we need to let our values guide this discussion or whatever the case might be.
That's exactly it. Yeah. You'll see somebody making some signal in the room and suddenly you realize, that's a sticky statement. What did we forget?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. I like also, Dorian, this might be the first time I've heard somebody do this way. I'm a big believer in, where we can reinforce values in our one-on-one meetings with our direct reports is really valuable. I love how you created a question around each of those rather than just saying, well, are you dreaming on?
Yeah.
But you actually figured out what's the right question in a one-on-one conversation that's reinforcing this value without it being kind of a stale just checklist of the values. Those felt like very much more meaningful questions to ask in a one-on-one. Did that take some time to get that right, or did that come pretty naturally to you?
It took a little bit of time. I had found some work on how to meet with direct reports about this, but then in conversation with my direct reports, we began to shape the questions around how we are. I mean, initially, my question on celebration was, what wins do you have? And one of our staff members was like, that feels too much achievement-based. And so talking with her and collaborating around it, we came to celebrations as a way, like, what can we celebrate? What is happening that we can look at that is encouraging to us, rather than did you achieve?
Yeah. It was almost sending the wrong message unintentionally. Yeah. I like also how you acknowledged that the team was giving feedback on how these were working into organizational rhythms, right? It was like, hey, that question's not landing, I think, quite to the spirit of the value, right? So they were kind of raising that. And so I think sometimes I see organizations get paralyzed by trying to do the culture work because they try to get it 100% right at the beginning. And what I've found, and I think you can attest to this because I want to hear some of the things you guys have continued to be doing, but we need to start simply and consistently because, everything we do is shaping culture in our organizations. It's who we are and it's how we work together. So much of what we're doing in our everyday rhythms is shaping our culture, and it can get a little overwhelming to go, where do I even start? And so I think recognizing, hey, we start simply and consistently, and then we keep building on it and we get feedback and we make adjustments. So, even adjusting that question in your one-on-ones was a response to feedback you were getting from the team. Talk to me about some of the other things that you guys are continuing to work on. It's been right at a year since we did the workshop together. You did all that work on the values. But what are some of the other things you guys have been doing to keep reinforcing your culture over this past year?
Yeah. So, Jenni, I don't know if you remember in our workshop that there was a lot of discussion around innovation as a value for us.
Yeah. Yep. And it was a bit aspirational, wasn't it? Am I remembering that right?
It was aspirational. The first line in our culture document that we give to new staff hires is, we plan our work and work our plan. Hey, we booked you 9 months ahead. That's no surprise. But for those who have done Working Genius, your wanderers, the people who want to dream and think, and that's really what was driving the innovation value. We have a fair number of wanderers on staff, and they were having no space to speak. That was coming out of the workshop. Well, we still struggled with that. So by August, so this was 5 months after the workshop, our culture team came to the staff and said, look, we see a conflict in how we're working together between innovation and focus. We're not finding the time to innovate. We're struggling to focus because we are in the middle of trying to focus in on work. People are coming up with new ideas. This is causing some chaos. And it was our executive director who came back with an idea to just restructure our meetings around innovation and focus. And so that's what we began to do. And we're in the middle of learning that right now. So we created a series of meetings. Same people are in the meetings, but there's a meeting that is focused just on innovation, just ideation, just coming up with ideas. Then we dive into a feasibility meeting where it's about what are we going to do? There's focus there.
Yep.
Then there's the implementation side of the work where now our enablers and our tenacious people, they're going to dive in and try to bring the work to completion.
So good.
That is all of our values happening in the meetings. There's innovation, there's focus, there's collaboration, there's relationship components to that. And then throughout it all, we are constantly doing let's pray first. which, by the way, that has something the new culture team has just picked up as a potential challenge, that our sticky statement is replacing our value.
Oh, sure. Yep.
We keep talking about praying first, but the value is Christ-centered living.
Mm.
And so we're actually coming to our staff in a couple of weeks to talk about, do we need to change the sticky statement because it's overwhelming the value?
Interesting. Yeah.
Sticky statement is focused on prayer. And so we think if we've prayed first, we've met our value. But that's not what the value is. The value is about connecting with Christ, being Christ-centered in our life, encouraging each other in their relationship with Christ. And so that's going to be an interesting discussion. So I'll give you feedback after that.
That's so good. Well, and again, I love that. And I love that you're not even afraid of that. Like a year in, it's like, because you guys have worked so hard to like dial these in. But now it's like, okay, we're noticing it, something that might not be completely aligning with the original intent of that value. So do we need to adjust again?
Right.
And I love that awareness of, that's part of healthy culture. Culture is, it is building or eroding every day. Like it is, because it's the humans, it's all of us collaborating together to do this work. And so there's going to be different interpretations as we start living into those values. Then we start to see, okay, where are we, getting closer to it, or where are we unintentionally drifting away from the original intent? And so I love that you're just going, okay, let's anchor back and look at this and see if we need to make any adjustments. And I think that's so healthy to stay tethered to that definition of who we are and how we work together. So yeah, I just love the intentionality around, hey, we're willing to adjust. We're willing to revisit when we need to revisit for the sake of continuing to live into, to that definition of culture. So good. Dorian, tell me this, your team, as I recall, allows for some remote work, and that's what a lot of us have done is we've made adjustments. We have more flexible work schedules. How has that impacted culture for you guys? I hear a lot of rumblings of that as like, just figuring out how do we keep a consistent culture when we have maybe less proximity and so forth. So maybe speak to that.
Sure. So, remote work, in one sense, it makes your values harder to live out, right? It's hard to collaborate and build relationships when you're not in the same building together. But all that means is it requires more intention. So our staff, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are in-office days. And so people are there, they committed to that, they're making it work. But it's not uncommon that people go, I'm off-site on Monday or Thursday or Friday. But hey, we use Microsoft Teams for our products. And so you'll often hear us say, hey, let's get on Teams for that. And so as long as there's this commitment and intentionality to keep the value so that, our small groups person isn't planning off on their off-site day, doing all their own work, and then they come in with a whole new plan and nobody's told our communications person. Our trust in them as staff is that they're communicating with each other even while remote. So it does make it harder, but it means you have to increase your intention. The other side, though, remote work makes other values easier. If we're about Christ-centered living, giving our staff the capacity to go, you know what, I need to spend some time with Jesus. I need to be off-site and have a retreat. I need to go on a prayer day. Or for us to have focus, you know what, I need to be at home because that will give me some solid focus. Mondays are my research days. When I was campus pastor and executive pastor, because I was doing both, Mondays would be my sermon writing days. That was my time to focus. Now it's my time to dive more into strategy and research for what we need.
Sure.
So those offsite days are so valuable, and people do value them. It's funny you talk about remote, though, because our relationship value has come up in front of our culture team as, we might be hindering this a little because what's happening on our on-site days, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, they're overloaded with meetings.
Yeah, I've heard this from other teams.
Meetings. And so it's not uncommon that somebody can't even find a space with somebody. Instead of making a top-down decision, instead of as a executive pastor, me mandating, we're going to have another office day, or you must be in the office from 9 to whatever, or 8 to whatever. we're going to come to our staff and say, and this is where the value grid was so helpful. These are our behaviors attached to relationships. We talk about having fun together. We're talking about making space for each other. We're talking about connecting with each other. How are we doing that when we're squeezed with meetings?
Yeah.
So maybe a question to our staff. Do you think we should add another on-site day? Or how might we bring more fun into our workplace? The culture team has a wonderful suggestion for our staff, which if they listen to this before our meeting, they'll get an insight. A lot of companies do beer carts. You know, they we didn't think that would work in a church. So we're going to do a soda and snack cart.
Brilliant.
So we ask all our staff, because we want to build into your relationship value. Hey, what's a soda you love or a drink you love? What's a salty snack? What's a sweet snack you love? And then we're going to have what we call recess. That was part of our relational commitment. We're going to have recess together. We're going to pull out the cart and come and get your favorite drink. So that's our way of trying to build into that value a little more while maintaining our flexibility of being remote.
Yeah, so good. Dorian, what I love that you identified there is sometimes what we refer to as competing values. Like sometimes what you find as you begin to live into your values is they will occasionally feel almost at competition with one another.
Yeah.
So that value of focus and the value of relationships, can, especially when we're talking, the dynamics of remote work. And so when we are on site together, we're trying to maximize every hour and, then it gets crammed with meetings and all of a sudden we've removed the relational piece, which is actually the opportunity when we're on site together. And so I love that you guys are, we're just looking at that and recognizing sometimes there are almost what seems like conflicting values. And then you have to, look at that and then parse out, okay, what do we need to adjust to make sure we can live into our values even when we feel a little bit of conflict. So I love that. And sometimes it is something simple. And you've also acknowledged a couple of times that I haven't called out, but the power of the culture team, where you've got a group of people who are in different seats in the organization who can speak into it and provide ideas and suggestions as well. Because sometimes, when we're in a senior leadership seat like you are, we don't always feel how it impacts the rest of the staff, or we don't always feel what they need the same way that they will feel it. And so having a team of people who are that are rallying with you to be culture champions and help have perspective on what's working, what's not working, where are we living into our values, where are we not, just so powerful. So you just have modeled so many things that are so valuable to implementing this work well. Let me give you this last question because I've already kept you long, but this conversation is so fantastic. What has stood out to you, just as you've led this, you've been intentional in defining the culture, building the plan. You guys are living into it. You're a good year into the intentional work. You guys were doing good culture work. Like you said, it wasn't in crisis. You had been doing some culture work, but now you've been living into the framework for about a year. What's standing out to you, and what encouragement would you give to leaders listening as well?
Yeah, so there's plenty of books about culture, and there's this hot topic of get a great culture. I knew that before I even contacted you about the workshop. But the question I always had is, well, that's great, but how?
Yeah.
And what your workshop did for us is it gave us tangible tools, practical, accessible, that we could use from day one. So values grid was just a very easy way for us to look at our values and look at our behaviors and say, are we living up to these? We selected them. Are we living up to them? But then the whole LeadCulture framework just allows us to assess that definition of culture you gave is who we are and how we work together. What a great way to just come to people and say, hey, we decided, we discovered this is how we want to work together. We're not living up to it. How can we get back to that?
Yeah.
So the LeadCulture framework for me is something I'm constantly going back to, constantly pulling out. Now that it's in your book format, it means I don't need to go through emails and post and all this other stuff. I can go just to the book to get it. But which, by the way, I just went and bought your book and gave it to all of our culture team. I was like,
I love that.
because that is so helpful for us moving forward. And we're on a journey. Our goal is not to be the last staff people on this church. So let's build a healthy culture, a thriving team that somebody would love to be a part of, and that when we move on to whatever's next, this church continues until Jesus returns. That's the goal.
So good. So good. Yeah. And Dorian, I love that that's even the heart and the vision for the work is like, it's not even really about me. It never should be as a leader, right? Like we're trying to help, you've heard me say this, the listeners have as well, that leadership is sacred work. We get the privilege of changing and affecting the lives of the people that we're entrusted to steward for the season we have leadership. And that's the heart of culture. That's the heart of why we get so purposeful about defining who we are and how we work together, is creating an environment where people can thrive. They can use their God-given gifts. And we're all doing this in partnership to achieve the mission that God has called us to. And like you said, we're here for a season, but we want to steward and create a culture that is healthy and thriving, that as people come and go and the next generation takes and leads it, we've built a healthy foundation for it. So valuable. It's going to be no surprise to the listeners that you became one of our LeadCulture certified coaches. We just have a handful of coaches right now certified in the framework. You were one of the first to do that because you just clearly have embraced it and embodied it and are living it out. If people are interested in connecting with you, whether for leadership coaching or for having you do a workshop, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is through email, dorian@getforesight.com. I mean, I am passionate about coaching people to purpose and productivity. Purpose about their own lives, purpose about their organization, and not productivity in terms of getting the most out or, the best return on investment, but productivity about character and achievement and Christ-centeredness. So this idea of being the best you can be and the way God created you to be, I'd love to help people do that. So Dorian@getforesight.com, easiest way to do that.
Perfect. And I'll link to that in the show notes. Friends, if you want to reach out to Dorian, even if it's just to say, hey, can I chat to learn more about what you do and how you do it, just shoot him an email and he'll hop in a call just to even answer any questions that you might have or help support you in your leadership or culture journey. Friends, this work is so meaningful, and I hope you enjoyed just hearing what Dorian had to share about how they've practically lived this out, and just keep learning and keep developing the work that they're doing as a team. It's so incredibly just rewarding in so many ways. Not always easy, but super rewarding. As Dorian mentioned, the framework is found in my new book, Culture Matters. You can find it anywhere books are sold or go to culturemattersbook.com. and learn more about it. But the LeadCulture framework is really the resource we've developed, Dorian and his team have utilized to live into that definition of who we are and how we work together. And so we encourage you, just check it out, reach out to us, let us know how we can support you, and keep leading well. We get to do the sacred work of leadership, and it's absolutely a gift. So we're cheering you on, and if we can support you in any way, please reach out to us here at Foresight.